All right. Please be seated. All right, welcome to another class, Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification course. Excuse me. Welcome, and we're glad to see you out here in the audience and also online, if for those of you that are online. And of course, we're in the the self-control unit, of course, and of course, stop. See it on the front there. But we'll be moving right along here to lesson plan 4, page E. That's where we're starting at. We're going to look at kind of where we left off and where we're going to. And if you look at procedure number 8 on that page, it says, explain to students that until everyone learns to communicate with consideration, we talked a lot about consideration and empathy, and we'll be talking about it again this evening, they are likely to encounter people who are out of control. Tell students that any situation where someone is out of control is a potential crisis. I think we covered that pretty well the last few classes, in fact, but like it says, if someone is out of control, there is a potential for problems, okay? Now, have students read the section entitled How to Respond When Others Lose Their Self-Control, and we did go over the RESPOND acronym, and putting it all together, found on pages 106 through 108, and that's where we're at right now. We're in there. In fact, we will be starting on page 107 or 108, excuse me. We'll be starting on page 108 this evening. So let's go ahead and take care of that, and then we'll come back to the lesson plan and continue, okay? So on page 108, it starts out and says, think about it. Well, without self-control, anger can quickly turn to rage. An enraged person can cause harm to you and to others. However, if you can maintain your composure and are willing to use self-control to communicate and interact in positive ways, a peaceful solution can be found. And then, of course, putting it all together, keep in mind that you'll need self-control to respond, and remember the RESPOND acronym over on the previous page there. On page 107, you'll need self-control to respond appropriately in a crisis situation. Here is how you would put the STOP acronym to work. So what we're going to look at here is a slight twist on the STOP acronym. I'd like to just remind you the basic STOP acronym. I've got it right here. Let's take a look there, see if you can see it. Stop, think, consider your options, and proceed with the right choice. Now that's the pure basics, okay? Everybody should pretty well have that down. Set that down there. But today we're going to get a little bit deeper into the meaning of the STOP acronym and look at the different points, okay? So if you look at the first letter, STOP, S is for stop. Acknowledge that you are in a situation that could become a crisis. So you have to acknowledge this first. You've kind of got to know that, hey, wait a minute, I've got a situation going on here. I better do something. The outcome is uncertain, but is likely to be negative if you respond with anger. Then we want to go ahead and think. Also, think about remaining hydrated, like we talked about last time, right? So we want to think, and so when we're thinking, we want to consider that the individual or individuals are angry or enraged and could cause harm to, us, others, themselves, whatever the case might be. In this considering, that makes it kind of sound like, well, we're only going to consider that they're going to be a problem, they're going to be angry and out of control. But considering, we want to consider what's going on with them. Consider what is their problem, consider where their mindset is at, what's going on with them. Can we kind of try to walk a mile in their shoes for a minute, kind of see where they're coming from? And we might have a better outcome in this entire situation if we can do that. And it takes, of course, all the things we've been learning about: active listening, it takes empathy, it takes respect. We've got to do all of these things. In fact, turn over to page 106 for a minute and look at the bottom half of that, how to respond when others lose their self-control. Look at the second paragraph. It says, when you are in a conflict where someone else is on the brink of losing control, it's up to you not to allow their behavior to influence the way you respond. Did you get that? When you are in a conflict where someone is on the brink of losing control, it's not up to them at this point. They've already lost control. You're not going to have any success waiting on them to change what they're doing. It's up to you to not allow their behavior to influence the way you respond. Don't allow it to influence you, because it would be a negative influence. And you could then forget everything you've been learning and possibly respond with anger and make the situation very, very hard to deal with. This can be very difficult to do, and the likelihood is that some of your anger triggers will be pushed. So there again, you have to be aware of your triggers. You have to be aware of your anger style. You have to be aware of the entire anger sequence of how everything takes place in this situation. It's not an easy thing to do. I'll tell you, there's people that put a lot of time into getting degrees in college, and you've got to put a lot of time into this too. It's not an easy thing. It's not just you make up your mind one day and boom, you're just, walking around just rosy all the time and everything's fine. It doesn't work like that. You got to work at it. So I like to look at it as though this is the highest degree that you can get. Instead of working towards a degree, as a lawyer, doctor, whatever the case might be, and spending, 8 years or more in college, I think spending that kind of time plus in the peaceful solution will get you the highest degree. And that's the way we need to look at it. And you need to put that type of effort into it too, into remembering these things. When I'm talking about remembering these things, I'm not telling you to remember, what page it says that you can learn to communicate effectively, what exact page that particular paragraph is from. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about learning. I'm talking about truly learning what it's all about, the ins and outs of it. I'm not talking about some rote memorization of, what page something is on. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we've got to do is learn how to put this to work in our lives. That's the key. And it takes practice. We're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight, too. Let's go on back over to page 108. So we're going to stop and acknowledge that there's a situation that could be bad. We're going to think about it, and we're going to really consider the other person, too. Not just that they're angry. We want to think about what's going on here. Now, look at options. So when we get to the O for options, we want to put the RESPOND acronym to work. Now, does it mean that that's the only way to do this? Do you have to remember the RESPOND acronym and remember what the R and the E, and if you get to the E and you can't remember what the S is for, you blow it all out of whack and you might as well just get angry at the person and go off? No. This is one thing. This is one tool in your toolbox on how to conduct yourself with people. So put the RESPOND acronym to work. If you don't remember the RESPOND acronym, then remember everything else that you've been learning and practicing in your life in the peaceful solution and put it to work for you in the situation. But if you can remember this RESPOND acronym, it's pretty awesome, the steps that it takes you through. Remain calm, stay in control, evaluate the situation. I can't put enough stress on the word evaluate. To evaluate the situation, to really think about what's going on, Evaluate it. Determine the right words to say. Is this a situation where active listening would be helpful? Well, yeah. Active listening is helpful in every situation. Remember to stay objective. Someone could intentionally try to provoke you into a fight. You have to be willing to be humble, apologize whether you did anything wrong or not, and walk away if it's appropriate to do so. Remember, you would not always walk away from an authority figure. That would be disrespectful to do. There is a situation where it might be required, if you were being told to do something that you knew in the peaceful solution was absolutely wrong to do, and you were willing to go to their boss or the authority over them. And then you would proceed by making a decision to keep yourself and others safe, to resolve the conflict. Look over at page 93 and 95 real quick. Just as a reminder, let's look at 93. So listening requires self-control. Yeah, so this is where we're talking about active listening, and we're talking about considering others and so forth. And if you look at if you look at the second paragraph up at the top, it says, self-control when listening means to make sure, through active listening, that you are not only hearing what's being said, but that you also, get this, that you also understand the intent behind the words. There's a thing called intent, which is very important. Even in police society, police work, and in certain court proceedings and so forth, intent is very important. Did you have the intent? You might be guilty of doing something, but did you have the intent to do that thing? So the intent of your mind, the intent of your heart is an extremely important thing that we need to look at. So we want to look at the intent behind the words that's coming from the person. If you're not an active listener, you couldn't possibly know the true intent. That's what makes a great counselor. Someone who can be an active listener, let the person talk, and through all the many things that come together and kind of synchronize together to be a great counselor and listener. Body language. You're sitting there looking at the body language of the person. You're looking at the facial expressions. You're listening to the tone of voice. You're listening to the words. And after much experience and much practice, you can become pretty great at knowing the intent of what's being said. So that's what we want to get to, is that point to where we can do that. In other words, you're trying to comprehend what the person is saying and feeling. Learning to be an active listener is going to help you solve problems and disagreements, because it opens a great door to communicating that most people don't know. Okay. So once again, putting it all together with the STOP acronym, keeping the RESPOND acronym in mind, stop and acknowledge that you're in a situation. Think, consider about the other individual, what's going on with them, consider what they're going through, consider, by using active listening. Then O for options, put the RESPOND acronym to work, remain calm, stay in control, evaluate the situation, and determine the right words. And through active listening, you can remain objective, and you can be willing to be humble and, walk away if necessary to solve the situation, and then proceed by making a decision that works for everybody. All right, let's go on back over to the lesson plan. So we just finished up with page 108, and then we want to go to procedure 9. It's an activity. There's scenarios. It says to instruct students to read the scenarios given on pages 109 through 110 and discuss each scenario and possible outcomes if they did not respond with self-control. Now, in a smaller classroom situation, a group of, say, 10 or 20, something like that, you could really dig into these scenarios. You might even spend the majority of the class on a scenario if you're not careful. But that's okay because the understanding is taking place then. So we're going to look at these scenarios. We can't get too deep into them. We've got to keep moving on, and we'll come back to procedure 10 shortly. So let's go ahead and turn over to page 109. Now, as a teacher, when we have a little bit of freedom on the stage, if you will, it's fun sometimes to do these scenarios, to act a few of them out. The students enjoy it. You get some volunteers from the class, and the teachers enjoy it, and so it's really kind of neat to do if you're in the situation where you can do it. So on page 109, the following scenarios depict situations that could become harmful if you do not stop and respond appropriately. Remember to communicate in a positive way by choosing your words carefully and using your active listening skills. So take a look at that little cartoon right there and see if you can decide what's taking place. So scenario 1, Adam and Rick were trying out for their school chess team. Adam loved playing chess since he was a small child. Rick, on the other hand, wasn't even interested at first, but after being friends with Adam for a while, he became interested. When it was time to make the selection for the team, Rick was chosen and Adam was not. So here you got the guy, didn't even care about chess, but, because his friend played it, he learned to play it too, and he actually gets chosen for the team. But the boy that had made it, the young man that had made it part of his life, kind of became very upset. And he started swearing and throwing his bag against the lockers and, just out of control. Well, what should Rick do at this point? So put yourself in Rick's shoes for a minute and think about your friend throwing a fit and you know that this meant a lot to him. What would be the best bet at this time? Do you really think you could try to console him? Well, so there's a couple choices there. You could be kind of a smart aleck and say, man, just grow up, get over it, Or you could consider he's, having a problem, walk away and give him a little space and come back a little bit later. Okay, so that would be the choice, is to give him a little bit of space, okay? Scenario number 2. Jane and Marley had been friends since they were 3 years old. One summer prior to high school, and when you hear these scenarios, you might be thinking back on if anything like this has ever occurred with you. But Marley met some new friends who used drugs. One day, while alone with Jane, Marley pulled out a marijuana cigarette joint. Marley said, "Hey, do you want to try some? When you smoke this, nothing bothers you anymore, man." Well, Jane had determined in her mind never to get involved in drugs, so she adamantly refused. Marley became angry, accusing Jane of not being her friend anymore because she wouldn't try marijuana. Well, what should Jane do? So the choices are, tell Marley that a real friend would remind her of the dangers of drugs, or B, start yelling back at Marley. While the initial thought might be to start yelling back, it would probably be better just to mention to your friend that a real friend would remind her of the dangers of drugs. And it would be a wise idea, too, to probably let an authority figure know what was taking place at this time, because she obviously is in a bad situation and she needs some help. All right. Anybody ever been in those situations or something similar? I know I have. I can look back and see those things taking place, whether I was the person, the perpetrator, or whether I was the one, that was trying to calm things down. If you think about it a minute, we've been in situations. And these are just to get our mind thinking about it. Scenario 3 is you had to leave the classroom for a moment, and when you returned to your class, another student had taken your seat. Uh-oh. You politely asked him to let you have your chair. He looked at you angrily and told you to get out of his face. Oh, you asked him again in a polite tone to move from your seat. The student began to turn red in the face, reached into his pocket and pulled out a switchblade and asked you if you really wanted your chair back. What would you do? Now, that's a little extreme right there, in the classroom, but probably not for these days. I mean, I've heard some pretty crazy stuff. So would you say no and go get the teacher's attention, or would you tell him, yes, I do want it, get up, Well, that might not be the wise thing to do, especially since you have somebody already expressing these violent tendencies. You might want to just get out of there, okay? Scenario 4, you're standing at your locker after school when you hear someone approaching you. You turn around and recognize the face of a bully. You begin to tremble. The bully towers over you and begins to shout obscenities in your face. And my mind kind of goes to, this is taking place and there's a whole bunch of people around. It's not like the bully's by himself probably, because bullies really don't operate like that too much. Yeah, they do some, but really there's probably a bunch of people around, egging this whole thing on. So you start shouting obscenities in your face, and you try several times to walk away, but you're grabbed and shoved back against the locker. Where do you think you're going? Asked the bully. Well, what would you do? Start looking around to see if there's a teacher or some help present, probably is one thing, but, start kicking the bully, apologize for getting in her way, and try to walk away quickly and find a teacher. Well, that would be the wise choice, is B, not to start kicking or hitting, especially if you're already kind of startled by this bully. But if you could possibly apologize and get out of her way, try to walk away, that'd be the best thing to do. It's always best to walk away from a situation like that. There's no winning. Scenario 5, you're in the parking lot of a mall with your older brother. Now, this one to me is a very viable situation that could occur. You're in the parking lot of a mall with your older brother, and you're waiting for a parking space when your brother becomes impatient. He blows the horn 3 times and motions for the car in front of him to get out of the way, while you're thinking, man, calm down, guy. Instead of moving his car, the man steps out and comes up to the window of the driver's side. All right, now you got a problem. Looks like I'm going to have to teach this punk a thing or two, says your brother as he begins to open his car door, and you're looking out there. The man's twice the size of your brother, already has his fist clenched and is ready to go. What would you do? Get out of the car with your brother and confront the man? Yeah, let's get him. Or tell your brother it's not worth it, encourage your brother to drive away before the guy busts the window and gets to you, That would be the best bet probably, okay? You want to think of the peaceful solution to the problem. Is the bully going to be mad still, or the guy, is he going to be mad when you drive off? Well, possibly, but the best bet to keep everybody in the situation safe is to go ahead and drive off if you possibly can, without hitting him or running over his feet or something like that. Think about what you're doing. We're not wanting to hurt anybody. Even in a situation where someone's trying to hurt us, we're not trying to hurt anyone. We not only want to not get hurt, but we also don't want to hurt either, whether it be verbally or physically. Think about it. Now, on page okay, so go back to lesson plan 4, page E, and we looked at these scenarios and did a little research into them there. And let's go on to procedure number 10. So we're going to conclude the lesson. Well, conclude the lesson by having students turn to page 112. But what we're going to do is we're not actually going to turn to 112. We're going to turn to page 111. Notice this is another one of those situations where page 111 is not actually listed, but it's an important page. It's not one that we would want to miss, okay? So let's go ahead and look at page 111 real quick. The choice is yours. It takes courage and strength of character to practice self-control when you're being deliberately provoked. Now, I want you to look at the word practice. It says it takes courage and strength of character to practice self-control when you're being deliberately provoked. Think about it. So here you are, and someone comes up and deliberately provokes you, and you've been learning a little bit about the peaceful solution and kind of thinking, oh yeah, that sounds pretty great and everything, kind of made up your mind that's really what you want to do. There's a problem here. You don't start practicing something in one night. I mean, you don't, that's not the culmination of your practice. You can start practicing, but if you have a situation that comes at you quickly and unexpectedly, without having been practicing self-control, you're probably not going to handle it properly. So this is why we have to get started now in practicing this, using it every day. Well, we'll get down this page a little bit, and I want to go back and look at something, but here it is right here. You've got to set your mind in advance to use positive communication and respond peacefully even when you're being antagonized. Now on page 80, in fact, page 80 to 90 in your character unit, wow. If you ever wanted to memorize something, memorize those pages. Because that stuff right there, if you can put that to work in your life, that's amazing. It starts out with setting your mind in advance, and then it continues on to, okay, there's going to be problems, there's going to be some curveballs and pitfalls from time to time, and then it finishes up with, leaving yourself and others room to grow also. Don't kick yourself. There's 10 pages of valuable information in there that everybody should really be working on. If you have that stuff going on in your life, if you're practicing that stuff right there, you can do this. You can handle when those situations come your way. Setting your mind in advance, page 80 in your character unit, at the top, have you ever heard the saying, it's all in your head? Well, most people say it sarcastically, but there's some truth to it. Whether you're aware of it or not, every action begins with a thought. Thoughts, feelings, actions, then rewards and consequences. Remember that step through right there? And setting your mind in advance to maintain your positive character traits begins by first considering, there's that word again, just how important it is to have moral character. To be trusted, admired, respected, and known as an honest, reliable, compassionate person is something you should want. You should be seeking that reputation because your reputation precedes you. What a shame and what a horrible crime it is for someone to destroy that reputation by lying and making up things about somebody. That's a horrible crime beyond even compare. It's right in there with murdering somebody. If you murder them by destroying their reputation, you can see their life go away. There's divorces and families broken up and jobs lost and suicides committed every day in this world because somebody, some despicable person ruined somebody's reputation. If you're ruining people's reputation, you are not a trusted, admired, respected, and reliable and compassionate person. That's just the only thing there is to it right there. You should be desiring this, and you should be desiring to have that reputation of that person that builds people up instead of tears them down. So you can set your mind in advance to have these things working in your life. Anyway, once you've responded appropriately and found a peaceful solution, give yourself credit for having made the right choice to avoid a crisis situation, and then let it go. Okay, there you go. That's some people would throw in the towel right there. It's over with. I can't do that. I just can't let go of it. right there's where a lot of people throw in the towel, man. You know, they're working on it, they're moving along and everything, and somebody comes along and, destroys their reputation, throws a curveball their way. What are you going to do? Well, you don't have to continue on with that person and continue on letting them do that, but you shouldn't retaliate against that person either. Here's what you do. Don't replay the incident over and over in your mind, because if the person who antagonized you causes you to feel embarrassed, and so they did something that triggered your embarrassment, embarrassed or afraid, then deal honestly with these emotions by talking about it with a friend or trusted adult. Now, you might find that that trusted adult might say, you need to stay away from that person. If you hold on to these emotions, you could begin to have negative thoughts about yourself and about the person you had the conflict with. This will cause you to feel frustrated and resentful. One of the things that you've got to do when you get counsel from somebody, especially from somebody aware of the entire situation and it may involve someone else, when you get that counsel, you need to do what that counselor says. Otherwise, don't even ask the counsel. Why ask if you're not going to do it? If you're not careful to guard your mind and you focus on the negative incident, you could seek to get revenge, and that's where we don't want to go. You don't want to be that person looking for revenge. You don't want to be that person that can't let go of something. Holding on to the emotional pain of anger or frustration will cause you trouble in the long run. You could end up exploding at others in rage when you reach your breaking point. So there's anger styles, and if you're one of those that takes something out on somebody else or on inanimate objects, you could end up, hitting that breaking point and going off on others, and they hadn't even done anything, and you're being kind of like the other person that this conflict is with, Or you could direct the rage at yourself and suffer from stress-induced headaches, stomach aches, other health problems. You could end up trying to hurt yourself, or worst of all, commit suicide. This goes on every day. You could look at the news right now and find where somebody, probably in their younger years, or I guess the age really doesn't matter, but you could find somebody that they committed suicide today, right? Today. Someone in this United States, or definitely in the world, but in the United States, probably in the state you live in, you could probably find where someone did it today. Always choose to respond peacefully in a crisis situation, and do not allow the incident to negatively affect your life, and do not retaliate. This only keeps the problem going. Let's, before we go back to the lesson plan, go back to page 80 in your character unit if you have it available. If not, you might want to write this down and go check it out. I highly encourage you, page 80 to 90 in the character unit of the Peaceful Solution, setting your mind in advance, curveballs and pitfalls, room to grow. Really, it doesn't get much better than that. That's really strong stuff, okay? So halfway on the page 80, watch your thoughts. It talks about watching your thoughts, and that's what we're talking about right here, is you choosing which way you're going to go. The choice is yours. What are you going to do now? You've got to choose. So in order to do that and do it properly, you have to have your mind set in advance, and you have to watch your thoughts, and this is the part right here. These thoughts continuously run through your mind, and they're very significant in controlling your actions and decisions. And you've got to be aware is that these negative thoughts might enter your mind when you feel someone has wronged you. Remember, just because you feel that someone has wronged you doesn't mean that they have. That's one of the types of disrespect that we're going to be learning about in another book coming up, but it's imagined. It's imagined disrespect. They really didn't do anything to you. It's just in your imagination. But it really does affect the way that you're, feeling and thinking. So some people become angrier and angrier by perpetuating these negative thoughts about a person and a situation. And you might be wanting to satisfy that anger. And many people have been put in prison because they harbored these negative thoughts and wouldn't let go and just let it build and build until they just couldn't hold on to it any longer. I want you to look at the fourth paragraph towards the bottom there under Watch Your Thoughts. It starts out and says, "It is important, however, when these types of negative thoughts of revenge enter your mind to immediately reevaluate them," going back to evaluating the situation, reevaluate these thoughts and turn them into positive thoughts that will not lead you to compromise your positive character. Some might find it to be easier over time to do this. If you can get your mindset, though, to where you're practicing this on a consistent basis, and that's the key, to consistently do it, day in, day out. Now you are really practicing these things, and when the situation comes, man, you're going to go, boom, just like that, right through it, and it's going to be like water on a duck's back. That's what it's going to be like. You won't even feel it. You won't even know the person said anything that would have bothered you in the past. You'd be just like, oh, okay, go on about your business, That'll be a great day. So you immediately evaluate these thoughts, turn them into positive thoughts, and don't let it compromise your positive character, okay? Of course, the instinct is to respond negatively, but you can train yourself to respond positively. So if while we're in there, I want to mention, I've already mentioned the curveballs and pitfalls. That's on page 85 in your character unit. And the curveballs and pitfalls are the unexpected situations like we were talking about over here where, it's your choice on page 111. The choice is yours. It takes courage and strength and character and practicing these things when you're being deliberately provoked not to attack, not to fight back. So on page 85 in the character unit, these curveballs and pitfalls are the unexpected situations that can test your resolve to maintain this positive character. You're caught off guard. They're unexpected situations, and you won't know how to deal with them if you have not been practicing how to deal with them. And it's going to be the same thing over and over again for you to relive it once again until you finally get it in your mind to practice these things on a consistent basis, daily, setting your mind in advance, remembering there are going to be these things that pop up from time to time that is totally unexpected. And you do need to, on page 88 in the character unit, leave yourself a little room to grow. Don't kick yourself too hard. Give yourself a little quick kick real quick and then move on. Leave yourself room to grow. You might respond, I can't believe I just did this. It's not what I meant to do. Okay, so you see where you were wrong, and now you can correct the situation. All the things that come together to help you to do this, your values, the whole process of your anger style and your triggers and how you feel about people, how you respond to them. If you truly believe that you should be showing respect to everybody, if you truly believe the words that come out of our mouths that say everybody deserves respect, if you truly believe all that and you get all this in your head and are practicing on a consistent basis, now you're on the way to doing it. Now you're on the way to being a person of integrity. It'll show in your everyday life. So we're going to go ahead and go to procedure number 10 in the lesson plan. It says to conclude the lesson by having students turn to page 112 and read what I have learned. Remind students to always practice the peaceful solution and interact with others in a positive, moral way. That's what we've been talking about here tonight. And by doing so, you can be examples for others who have not yet learned the importance of communicating with self-control. So that's what we want to be. We want to be the example. We want to be the person that everybody says, hey man, watch this. Watch what he does. Or man, I saw him do this the other day. This guy came at him, blah, 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 and you should have seen how he handled the situation. You could be that person You could be that very person. I'm thinking about people right now in my head that I could point to and say, man, look how he handled that situation. I already know some. It's going through there right now. And the successes that I've had and the failures that I've had in doing so are going through my mind right now too. And hopefully that will help me to be able to do better. You know, of course, leaving yourself a little room to grow. You know, let's keep it in in proper perspective there. I don't think we're going to finish this page, but we'll get started, and Chris will probably finish it up. So on page 112, what I have learned, back in our self-control unit. Now, the way that we communicate can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts. Notice it says it can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts. Now, we don't want to be the one, as a teacher or student of the Peaceful Solution, we're really not wanting to be the one that is leading this situation into a misunderstanding. We'd like to be known as the ones that solve the situation, that prevent misunderstandings rather than produce misunderstandings and conflicts. Let's see. I've got page 89 written down there. You might want to write that down. It helps to have some of these pages written down on what I've learned. You can go back to an actual page that talks about it. Of course, it's going to be spread out through the entire chapter and even other chapters, but it just helps to have the page number. Let's go look at page 89. So, in starting out in the introduction on chapter 4, applying self-control to interaction and communication, I'm just going to read the first two paragraphs for sure. But by using both language and behavior, we share our feelings, needs, and wants with others, and they in turn share theirs with us. Get that? By using both language, what's coming out of our mouth, and our behavior, our tone of voice, our facial features, all these things, the body language and everything goes along with it, we're sharing our feelings, we're sharing our needs and our wants with others, and they in turn share theirs with us. Wouldn't it be great if we could all understand that intent of what's being said by somebody? Wouldn't it be great if we could understand what their needs and desires really are of the people we're talking to, and we're putting their needs and desires above our own? Wouldn't it be great if we could get to that point? Because if we got to that point, there's not going to be any misunderstandings and conflicts much. We'll be so interested in helping the other person achieve what they're trying to achieve. Nevertheless, here we are. So relating to our family and friends, these things, relating to our family and friends enriches and fulfills our lives. Imagine not being able to communicate with those you care about. Simple things that you now take for granted would be impossible. We would be unable to tell someone about our day or share our likes and dislikes with our friends or family. Have you ever had really a great day and you got home and someone asked you, your wife or child or friend or somebody asked you, hey, how'd your day go? And you just can't hold it back. You're like, oh man, you should have seen how my day went today. And you're all, animated and they're just like, oh wow, you had a really great day, Those are the kind of things that help people to have joy. So it can go the other way too. On the other hand, have you ever listened to like I can think of there's this certain internet site that has some different knowledge type quizzes and stuff, and it has something on there like you might ask what is a prion or something, or whatever, and it automatically starts reading it to you in a robotic voice. There's no animation. There's no body language. There's no facial features. There's nothing there but a voice saying, the thing you have asked is a very viable question, and that question will be answered shortly if you just stay tuned for the next ad. And then it goes about answering your question. You ever seen something like that? Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous because you might get that little bit of knowledge, and you better check and make sure it's true knowledge, check it out. But there's no interaction with a human being there. There's nobody showing the excitement of their knowledge of what you asked and them wanting to relay that knowledge to you in a way that's understandable. There's nothing there. This is how interaction and communication enriches our lives. So ironically, the way in which we communicate often leads to misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and conflict. I would say, and I speak for myself, I've been guilty of responding in kind of a short answer. I'm working on something, someone asks something, and I'm like, yeah. Okay. No real response other than just really glib, short answer, that occurs sometimes, and that might not be what the other person was looking for. I might not have looked at the other person to see that their needs and desires are not going to be met by that short, glib answer, and then I would be considered rude by the other person, even though I gave the answer. I didn't yell or scream, but I would be considered rude because of the way that I answered, and they were expecting something quite different. Their needs required something differently than how I responded to their question. So I can't stress the importance of how we need to think about others and think about their needs and how we are responding to them. I think we're all learning together in that situation right there. We don't want to hurt feelings. People could go off after even something like that and could go off and just cry or feel very like nobody cares about me or what have you. And we don't want to be the one that's adding to that situation. Okay, an important part, down in the third paragraph, an important part of developing a positive moral character is learning how to communicate with self-control. Now, when we interact without self-control, feelings get hurt. People are misunderstood. Conflicts arise. That's what we're talking about, thinking about how we conduct ourselves with others, okay? Not just self-control, but with all the things we're learning about active listening and active communication. It all goes together. All right, so the second point on what I've learned says an important part of developing a positive moral character is learning how to communicate with self-control, of course. Without the use of self-control in our daily interactions, feelings get hurt and people are misunderstood. Now that does go back to page 89 also, but there's also some other pages you might find interesting to put some notes down too. You could look at page 99. Page 99, poor communication can lead to disrespect if you're not using self-control. If you look at look about halfway down. Well, let's just look at the whole thing. Everyone experiences conflicts or disagreements. Conflicts can occur between best friends, members of the same family, even complete strangers. In fact, conflicts can occur anytime you interact. We all have different likes, dislikes, and different moods. What makes each person tick is varied and complex. Because of this, no people are going to see eye to eye all the time, and you know what? That's okay. We just have to learn to communicate respectfully and effectively with each other. There's nothing wrong with having a different opinion than someone else. For example, two brothers can disagree on what color to paint their room, or two friends can disagree on what to do for an activity. Excuse me. However, conflicts or disagreements should never be an excuse to be rude or disrespectful. Did you get that? Conflicts or disagreements should never be an excuse for a teacher of the peaceful solution to be rude or disrespectful. It should never be. And if you're a student of the peaceful solution, you're a teacher in training of the peaceful solution, and so therefore you can never use these disagreements to be an excuse to be rude or disrespectful. We've got to be above that. We've got to be a step above that and be, again, the example of how it should be done, okay? And then, let's see. So we've got page 89, page 99, page 105. You could go there. And, it talks about what I just said, too. Sometimes those suffer at hands of those in authority who are supposed to be trustworthy and responsible for their well-being. And somewhere down the line, the communication has fallen apart. Somewhere down the line, that person that was trustworthy and responsible, lost everything that they were working towards. They threw in the towel. They said, it's too much for me. I can't do it, Let's look at the next point on what I've learned. For communication to be successful, there must be a speaker and there must be a listener. Both aspects of communication, the giving and receiving, require self-control. Now, if you turn to page 90 there, page 90, look up at the top. It says, what exactly is communication? And it says, to communicate means to convey knowledge, information, thoughts or feelings in a way that is satisfactorily received or understood. So let's stop there and talk about that. My short answer to somebody earlier because I was busy with something and they asked me something, and I said, yeah. What is it? Or, yeah, that's right. I go back to what I'm doing. Am I being an effective communicator? Am I doing what it's saying right here to do? To communicate means to convey knowledge, information, thoughts, or feelings. Okay, we know that part. We're going to convey all this. But it says to do it in a way that's satisfactorily received or understood. So if I'm not aware of the state of mind, the intent of what's being asked and how it's being asked, the body language, the facial features, the tone of voice, if I'm not aware of all of this coming from the other individual, if I can't take a moment out of my busy schedule and look at the person and understand what their needs are so that I can satisfactorily relay this information to them, am I actively communicating or not? What does it take to do this? It makes it much harder on the phone, by the way, because all you have is tone of voice and words to go by, basically. But the two most common forms of communication are oral and written. And, of course, there's many ways people communicate. Now, let's go down to the middle of the page and continue on with what our point was talking about. It says, for communication to be successful, and back up to the top, this is successful communication. We hope to be able to do that just about every time. There might be situations where it's not possible for that to occur. We're running past in a hurry to stop somebody from committing a crime, or running to get somebody that just fell into a hole, or we're running over here to do this or do that, and it's an emergency situation. It takes precedence. We got to keep all that in mind too. What's the situation with the person we're asking the information of? Is it the proper time for us to ask that person? Can we see that they're tied up with something and it might be better if we wait a little while? We all need to use our brains. So for communication to be successful, there must be a speaker and a listener. Two people, a speaker and a listener. One person must give information, the other must be willing and able to receive the information. And both aspects of communication, the giving and receiving, require self-control. So, we can't throw it all on the person that's being asked and they don't respond quite how we want them to. We need to also look at ourselves and see what the situation is on how we're asking the person. Are we asking an authority figure, our boss or something? Are we asking them while they're in the middle of talking to someone else? What should we expect when we do that? We should expect probably a fairly short answer and tell us, if you'll wait, I'll get with you shortly. Or it might be a little bit more curt than that. So we have to think about what we're doing here. We want to communicate together. It takes two people, not just one. You can't just throw it all on one party, okay? Two people to communicate. Let's get that straight. So for communication to be successful, there must be a speaker and a listener. Now, we're at the third point right there. We're at the third point right there on what I have learned. And we're getting a little close on time here. So I think this goes along with that one, though. Let's go ahead and hit it. The fourth point: when speaking to others, I can practice self-control by always considering what I say, how I say it, and to whom I'm saying it. So if I'm asking a question of somebody, I need to practice self-control by considering what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, to who I'm saying it, when I'm saying it, when I'm asking the question, and so forth. And as the person answering the question, I also need to consider using self-control by considering what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, etc. Okay? And like I said, it's not always going to be the right time to ask a question. You have to look at the situation and decide, is now the right time or do I need to wait? And that's some of the basic teachings in the Peaceful Solution that go all the way back to the parenting manual and the first and second grade manuals on when it's right for someone to ask, in this case, when it's right for a child to ask a parent a question or teacher a question and so forth. And we need to keep that in mind with dealing with the people we're asking a question of, okay? Well, I wanted to throw that in there. Make sure that everybody keeps that in mind. It does take two to communicate. Next week, or next class, we'll be starting again on page 112 and starting somewhere around the fifth point on what I have learned. And it should be Chris that would be here teaching the class on that day. And so we look forward to having everybody here again. That'll be on Wednesday, the 7th, the 6th. Oh, 6/1, I'm sorry. 6/1/2022 on Wednesday at 5:30. We had a little charade game going on here for just a moment. Hope you didn't mind. So anyway, look forward to seeing everybody that's online and then everybody here in the class tonight. Seeing you again. And thank you for coming tonight.